Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Sharper Skills in 30 Minutes, Environmental Justice Projects Part 2, brought to you today by the Urban Footprint Customer Success Team. I'm Andy Federer, and joining me today is Customer Success Manager Jason Hercules. Our Sharper Skills webinars are designed to highlight new features, showcase tips and tricks, and help you make the best use of the Urban Footprint platform. In this second installment of our Sharper Skills webinar on environmental justice, we'll dive into more applied examples of assessing a community against EJ goals and outcomes. Using state and guidance-specific frameworks, we'll use Urban Footprint to highlight a few aspects of environmental justice. First, we'll help understand if a community or neighborhood is a high priority for environmental justice screening. Next, we show how to use Urban Footprint to identify high priority issues that practitioners can be prepared to discuss when engaging with community members and stakeholders. Then we'll evaluate different approaches that can be taken for different communities. And finally, we'll show how to develop collateral that more specifically highlights and communicates the challenges a community may face. Before turning things over to Jason, I'd like to do a bit of a promotion for our paired planning program. If you aren't already familiar with it, our paired planning program partners you with our customer success team to accelerate your use of Urban Footprint on your projects. Here's how it works. When you have a project that you need some guidance on, just reach out to your customer success manager. We'll find a time to review your objectives and understand your timeline. Based on that, we'll develop a success roadmap that provides you with a plan for training you on how to use Urban Footprint that is tailored to the specific needs your project has. We'll get you up and running, establish checkpoints, and be available to answer your questions along the way. If you have a project that you'd like to discuss, reach out to your success manager to arrange a call to learn more about how we can support your work. I'd also like to remind you that our next webinar is scheduled for Wednesday, December 2nd, and will cover recent product updates, plus go into a bit more detail on how you can work with our customer success team to accelerate the delivery of your projects. You'll find a link to that webinar in our next newsletter. And with that said, I will turn things over to Jason.
All right, Andy, thank you very much. And thanks for joining us for part 2 of environmental justice. You'll remember that in part 1, we learned how the data and functionality of Urban Footprint can generally help us with important tasks associated with environmental justice assessment. Today, we'll move from that 2,000-foot overview to more specific assessment in applied examples. We'll do that by evaluating various approaches to environmental justice screening, incorporating state-specific data and guidance into our decision-making process, and then implementing by creating display content that specifically address relevant environmental justice and other community planning concerns based on the challenges for a given community. So let's begin by looking at how environmental justice is assessed in California. In this case, environmental justice assessment is not only clearly defined, but it's mandated in locations that meet specific criteria via Senate Bill 1000 or SB 1000. So here's some of that language that we have from the guidance that's provided in that mandate. And in the state of California, this even means that it's necessary to take the data that's made available through the state and online tools and the software platform that's called EnviroScreen, and this goes above and beyond what a number of other states actually provide and make available. So looking here at Objective 2, now we'll take this state-specific guidance and use this for defining critical populations that may play a role in environmental justice assessment. So this includes, for example, disadvantaged communities or low-income communities as well. You can see how the state even provides additional guidance for defining those communities so you can understand how to address those populations. So the EnviroScreen platform provides some insight on how communities perform against specific individual criteria, so such as poverty. And you can see here that in the Modesto area, which is where we evaluated in part one, that there's a relatively high prevalence of poverty, and that should be accounted for when planning and doing your community planning exercises. And then in another specific example, you can see here that the particulate matter, so PM 2.5, is of concern for a large area in this portion of the valley, including Modesto. And but we can also note that there's not a ton of specificity that we're working with at this level, and with just one data point at a time. So we'll note that in our planning process when we're using some of these resources, and show how we can do a little bit more and do it more dynamically. So now let's take a look at New York City as another example, or the state of New York, I should say, as another example. New York is another state that goes a long way in terms of providing guidance for environmental justice assessment. And while this isn't mandated by the state as it is in California, the state clearly provides criteria for evaluation to show, as shown here, making it easier for practitioners to understand when a community faces environmental justice concerns that should be addressed. So state resources also provide things like downloadable maps and data sets that help practitioners identify and understand these challenges. And so what we're looking at now is a map of Red Hook, New York, which is known for some of its planning efforts to undo some of the past injustices, along with other challenges that the location has faced. So this downloaded map concurs with that assessment, highlighting that Red Hook is an area of potential environmental justice concern. Additional resources that the state provides show individually what other challenges the community of Red Hook faces. So additional data sets show the impact of waste and wastewater treatment sites, and identifying these issues is pretty straightforward, but understanding the impacts and making plans to respond to them is not quite as easy. So you can see here clearly the identification of some of those challenges as we zoom in on Red Hook. But what do you do with this information as it's presented to you? So let's move over into UrbanFootprint, and we can take a look at and get a better understanding of some of the ways that you can make these types of assessments and make them come together a little bit easier. So I want to start with Modesto, California, which, as you'll remember, we looked at in part one of this series, and we'll start to do some planning exercises here. So in part one, we looked at a scenario in which we considered some of the sector plan options for this community in Modesto. So you can see our community highlighted here, Modesto, California. We considered a scenario in which enhanced transit access would provide residents with more job options. Improved mix of use and walk access could potentially reinforce this area's role. So our sector plan area that we were looking at here, this area's role in job opportunities, and also as a node and a connection for providing benefits to the community. We also debated the benefit of adding additional green space to the area. But all of these assumptions were made in part one without much quantification or ability to fully evaluate these impacts. And now we have more time to do that. So we're going to take a deeper dive into that. Since we essentially have an SB 1000 layer in UF for California, let's start with that. So you can see here in my layer list, I've got all the data pulled together. We have our base canvas where we're looking at the land use for the surrounding area and our sector plan area. Sector plan is called out. I'm going to actually dive into our environmental justice data set now and also remove our base canvas. So we're just looking at that data. And I'll pull back out a little bit as well so we can see how this looks in relation to the larger area. So we're looking at the Cal EnviroScreen score percentile. So this is the similar information that you saw on that sort of static slide that we went through in the slide deck, but it's now presented and made available to you in UrbanFootprint, and conveys the same information that we saw previously, and identifies the Modesto community, and particularly our sector plan area that we were working with, as an area that has some environmental justice concerns that we would want to address. And then just to show another example of some more specific challenges that the community would face, we can just go in and switch the column here. And again, this is the similar data that, so this is the particulate matter 2.5 percentile data. We switch to that column. And again, we can see that the connection between what we saw in that Cal EnviroScreen slide that I showed you earlier, and then also we can start to drill down more specifically into the data for what the community faces. From this, you're able to see that drilling down won't make a huge change, because what the community is facing in terms of air quality challenges is more of a regional challenge and more of a regional concern, not a specific point issue for our community. And so that our community area that we're looking at, our sector plan area, doesn't have any particularly hazardous locations in which we would want to kind of reconsider or take into account for including our open space in that area. It's really a regional challenge, and all the surrounding areas face a similar kind of air quality challenge as well. So this would be something that would need to be addressed as a regional strategy. And so kind of basing our decision for including green space in this area, I don't think should be determined solely by the air quality issue that's faced in our sector plan area, because it's actually a regional issue that needs to be addressed. And so the need for quality green space might override some of the air quality concerns, or would need to be addressed specifically by more of a regional approach. And in fact, we can even drill down a little bit more closely using a different data set here. So this is our federal EJ screen index. And this shows you that in this case, even though the percent differences aren't too huge, our surrounding community is actually is performing better, or our sector plan area is performing better than some of the surrounding community in terms of particulate matter score. So this means that we're slightly better off than the surrounding area, and we can go ahead and plan for green space, which is one of the first objectives that we identified in part one, and kind of confirms the need for some of that, or the ability to include some of that in our plan going forward. So let's try to quantify some of the other earlier assumptions that we made in part one with planning in this area. So I'm going to use a different view of the data from Cal EnviroScreen. And this layer shows the percentile score range, which you can see here in some of these upper tiers of challenges. So this really shows you some of the challenges that this area, sector plan area, faces. But it also shows you that some of these other surrounding areas around our sector plan area face environmental challenges and environmental justice challenges even more so than our sector plan area. In fact, these are the highest ranking percentile range areas, top of the score classification, the 95 to 100%, but then also some of the highest ranking in the area. So based on the score and the performance in this areas, I think it begins to support our idea that this corridor in this sector area could be an area of economic and other opportunity within the larger sector plan and within the larger community, because this really is a place of opportunity that is doing somewhat better than some of the surrounding areas. So this presents us with an opportunity here. Further supporting this idea, I want to take a look at the Smart Location database. So, and we're looking at the regional diversity data. And this shows just how much economic opportunity this sector plan area that we've been looking at has. particularly in comparison to some of the surrounding areas that we just highlighted as being those places that are faced by potentially more environmental justice considerations. So this is starting to build our argument for investing in this sector plan area, investing in this corridor, and the multiple opportunities that this would provide to the surrounding area and, of course, the sector plan area itself. So this helps to also provide a measurement to our initial screen of the area's land use that hinted to us that this is an area that has a lot of opportunity, because this quantifies it with a score that shows some of the diversity and really the amount of employment compared to the population. Meaning that a plan that would double down on the amount and breadth of economic activity that would happen in this area, particularly along the corridor that we identified in part 1, would be pretty well placed. And then a different column in this smart location database. So I'm going to, and I'll actually do a search for the data that we want to find here, so that make it easier to show you that functionality. So we want to look at the network density of multimodal links. Shows that there's really a lack of transportation options in the area. So again, a sector plan element that plans to or tries to improve the connectivity in this area. You can see the lower kind of density of multimodal links here. So improving on that transportation connectivity could be of additional benefit and could be beneficial. And finally, using some additional functionality that is available in UrbanFootprint, I want to show a functionality that we've shown before in previous webinars using our transit accessibility module, and in this case, using our specific point of interest analysis that's available in UrbanFootprint, and that I mentioned previously, we've highlighted before in other webinars. We can just get an assessment of really how connected or disconnected the heart of this sector plan area is from its surrounding location. So we started to understand and see the evolution of this sector plan as being a corridor or a node of economic activity, and how it could help to provide some opportunities for some of the surrounding areas that also were facing challenges, both economic and environmental justice challenges, by placing a point in the center of sort of the heart of our corridor and of our sector plan area that had a number of the jobs and economic activity. And using our point of interest analysis, we can see just how much there is sort of a lack of connectivity and how that doesn't go very far. There's a small breadth of area in which you can access all the jobs that would be in this location in 20 minutes. And that begins to drop off pretty quickly and becomes upwards of an hour or more than half an hour at least to be able to connect to the jobs and the opportunities that would be in this location. So in a matter of minutes, we've pulled together some pretty powerful insights that we can take to our community meetings and provide some insight to our practitioners and work through the planning process with this information as part of your decision-making process. So now with that in mind, let's turn our attention to New York as our other example that we'll take a look at today. So as mentioned, the state of New York provides some pretty solid guidance, but it's still up to the practitioners to help identify those locations and define the challenges in terms of environmental justice. So that environmental justice guidance goes pretty far, but you still need to be able to apply it. So let's begin to do that in Red Hook, the community that I'm familiar with that has faced many of these challenges, and that some of these challenges were in fact highlighted in Storm Sandy. So in the case of the state of New York, it says that income is one of the defining factors for EJ communities. So I'm going to use the income and census planning data here that's available. So again, we're starting with our base canvas. That's a view of land use. I'm going to jump into our census planning data. I'm actually going to turn off our land use, and you can see here these areas and these locations match up with some of the lower income areas. So this begins to define and show us that there are locations within Red Hook that meet at least one of those environmental justice criteria. To deepen our understanding, let's take a look at another column of census data. So I'm going to move to the race and ethnicity data that is also provided by the census. Again, information that we can work with now dynamically and quickly to get a better understanding of this information. So we're looking at the African-American population and its concentration in Red Hook. And so as we know, the African-American community has long been impacted by environmental justice disparities. And this map closely aligns with some of the income gap that we also saw in our previous layer. So these factors are starting to kind of identify themselves. And then to drive home the point a little bit further, I'm going to use this additional layer that's available, the racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty. And this is going to basically create a pretty binary identification and provides a clear understanding of the issue. So this is basically off-on in terms of identifying areas that are racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty. And you can see, again, some of the same locations that were identified in some of the previous EJ screen factors that I looked at are showing themselves here as well. So clearly we have identified that Red Hook as a community, and then those sectors particularly are impacted by these environmental justice issues. So let's track these insights that we just gained to what we saw earlier in our slide presentation about disproportionate pollution burden in the Red Hook community. But now I want to do that a little bit more dynamically. So we're going to use UrbanFootprint to pull that information together. The maps that New York State provided showed waste and remediation sites. So I'm going to do a little bit of a different workflow in that since the state makes data available for us, I've added that data to our layer list, and we can now work with that data dynamically in UrbanFootprint to get an understanding of what some of the impacts might be. So I'm going to turn off our race and ethnicity layer, and I'm going to start turning on some of the waste and remediation sites that are distributed across New York. And you can see that a number of them fall into Red Hook and surrounding areas, obviously, that are also well known for some of this disparity. But you can see that there's a lot of undue burden that some of the communities face. So these show that the impact of that environmental, of those environmental issues. And if you wanted to, or I'll note that if you are familiar with Red Hook, you know that sea level rise is an issue of concern for the community as well. So a more dynamic approach would allow us to take that into consideration while accounting for these environmental justice concerns that we just identified as well. Because really all these issues are interconnected, and a good plan would account for all of what I just called out. So let's bring that all together by turning on the sea level rise and seeing what type of impact this would have. So this is just filtered down to the Red Hook community. And this is a projected 3 feet of sea level rise that we're taking a look at now. So you can see some of the areas that are starting to be impacted by the encroachment of sea level rise here. And so that brings that concern to bear in our decision making. So the challenges are starting to all take shape. But I want to quantify the impacts a little bit more, and I want to get a better sense of the makeup of the communities that are being impacted by all of these challenges. So to do this, I'll place a small buffer around, or I've placed a small buffer around the remediation sites that I've called out specifically. So brownfield cleanup areas and some of the other areas that I've called out specifically. So I'm going to turn on that layer of that buffer layer that I've created here. And you can see these are now buffers that are placed around those specific types of challenges. And so now that's the radius essentially of the neighbors that are impacted by at least the remediation and cleanup sites that are in the area. So now that I've done that, I can easily overlay with my canvas information. So for example, my base canvas information, to get an understanding of all the impacted parcels that are within that close radius of areas that are being impacted by the cleanup and waste sites that we identified or that the state has provided to us. And so now this is a look of the land use and all the base canvas factors or base canvas features that are impacted by some of these waste and cleanup sites. And then by clicking on the layer to actually activate it, you can pretty quickly start to get insight as to what that impact is for the neighbors. So you can start to get things in terms of like the population that is impacted within those buffered areas and get a sense of those areas that are being impacted. You can look at employment, so the number of jobs that are being impacted by those areas, and just get a sense of the amount of impact that you're facing with those locations. And then by using something like our parcel reference layer, you are able to get another view, but then another perspective, but still some helpful information on the impacted sites. So again, using the parcel reference data, and again, just looking at the parcels and the properties that are within that buffered area that we've looked at, that is, I believe, if I remember correctly, 100 meters offset from the areas of concern. You can start to understand the amount of tax revenue that's being impacted by these waste and treatment sites, and just get a sense of the types of issues and quantify that information even more. You can see total property value, things like that. So you can start to get an understanding of the outsized impact of these issues. And then doing another step, like say overlaying our sea level rise data, will show us the locations that are particularly impacted by all of these challenges, waste site cleanups, future sea level impedance. And this would allow you to identify the communities and the community members that really need to be engaged and to be activated in pulling together a strong community plan that helps to address these multitude of issues. So, within a few minutes, what we've done is gained some valuable insights that have helped us understand what some of the challenges can be. Yes, we've done this not in full engagement with the community at this point, but then it will inform our community interaction as well and help us to put some solid plans in place and use these insights and these layers of data that are available in UrbanFootprint and the dynamic tools that allow you to work with that data to get a better understanding of the impacts of the issues that you're working with. And so with that, Andy, I think I'll wrap it up here, but I can turn it over for any closing words that you might have, or if we have time for questions, we can take a couple as well.
Well, thanks, Jason. Really powerful stuff. Appreciate that. At this point, I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. Again, you can see us at the last webinar of 2020 in 2 weeks. Look forward to seeing everyone then. Thank you.